Federal Judge Daniel Harris was tackled and arrested, without even being asked his name. The only reason? He was black. When the truth came out, the officers' careers crumbled, and the nation erupted in scandal. But that was just the beginning. What happened next would shock even those who thought they had seen it all. But let's start from the very beginning. The city of Mayfield was going about its usual routine: rush hour traffic, crowded streets, office workers hurrying home. Daniel Harris, a 50-year-old black man in an expensive suit, walked leisurely out of an upscale jewelry store. In his hand, a small box containing a ring, a gift for his niece. He had barely taken a few steps when a sharp voice made him freeze. "Hands up! Don't move!" Two white police officers, Sergeant Blake Randolph and his partner, Todd Baker, had their guns trained on him. The crowd instinctively stepped back, and several people pulled out their phones to record. "What's going on, officer?" Daniel asked calmly, making no sudden movements. "We got a report that a black man in a suit robbed a store in this area," Randolph snapped, already reaching for his handcuffs. "Are you sure it's me?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Enough with the smart talk. Hands on your head," Baker barked, grabbing Daniel's wrists. "You didn't even ask my name." Randolph rolled his eyes and twisted Daniel's arm behind his back, shoving him onto the hood of the patrol car. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones were now recording every second. "I'll say this once more. You're making a huge mistake." "Oh yeah?" Randolph smirked as he snapped the cuffs shut. "You think you're smarter than us?" Daniel clenched his jaw. He didn't resist, but fury burned inside him. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. "He didn't do anything," someone shouted. "Shouldn't you at least check his ID first?" an elderly woman asked indignantly. But the officers ignored them. They were already leading Daniel to the squad car when another voice rang out. "Officers, wait!" A store clerk rushed out from the very shop Daniel had just left, waving her arms. "It's not him! You arrested the wrong man!" Randolph hesitated for a split second, but then scoffed and waved her off. Too late. He can explain himself at the station. Daniel took a deep breath. He knew this situation was about to spiral far beyond a simple misunderstanding, and he knew that soon those officers' faces would change. Forever. The police car screeched to a halt in front of the station, its tires skidding against the asphalt. Daniel Harris was roughly shoved out of the car, his wrists aching from the tight handcuffs. "Move it!" Sergeant Blake Randolph barked, yanking him inside. Inside, the station was buzzing with activity. Officers filling out reports, phones ringing, detainees slouched on benches. But as soon as Harris entered, heads turned. A black man in an expensive suit among a lineup of scruffy, disheveled arrestees stood out. "What do we got?" the desk officer asked lazily. "Robber," Randolph smirked. "Classic case." The officer at the computer began entering data. "What did he steal?" "Doesn't matter. We saw him. It's obvious." Daniel clenched his jaw. They hadn't even checked the security footage. "Are you serious?" He turned to Randolph, locking eyes. "Do you even know who I am?" Randolph scoffed. "Another big shot, huh? Okay, Mr. Do You Know Who I Am?" He shoved Daniel into a chair inside the interrogation room. "Start talking. Maybe tell us where you stashed the loot. You've made a huge mistake." Yeah, I've heard that before." Randolph leaned on the table. "Listen, buddy, just confess. It'll be easier for everyone." Daniel let out a slow, knowing chuckle. "Really? Then why don't you check my wallet?" Baker lazily reached into the inside pocket of Daniel's jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. Opening it, his face instantly drained of color. Randolph noticed. "What? What is it?" Baker swallowed hard and handed the ID over. Randolph glanced at it, and his expression froze. "Judge Harris," he whispered. "That's right." Daniel leaned forward. "You just arrested a federal judge without evidence, without checking the cameras, and in clear violation of my civil rights." A heavy silence filled the room. This can't be," Baker mumbled, realizing the consequences about to crash down on them. "Oh, and one more thing," Daniel added, smiling faintly. "The street cameras recorded everything." Randolph shot up from his seat, his face flushing red. Their perfect arrest had just crumbled into dust. The silence in the interrogation room was sharp as a blade. Sergeant Randolph gripped Daniel's ID so tightly his fingers turned white. Officer Baker swallowed hard, avoiding eye contact with the judge. "Do you realize what you've done?" Daniel asked, his gaze locked on them. "Listen, Judge Harris," Randolph started, but his voice faltered. "No excuses." Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked. "You arrested me without evidence. Right in the middle of the street, in front of dozens of witnesses." At that moment, the door burst open. The police captain stormed in, his face tense. "What the hell is going on here?" His eyes darted between Randolph, Baker, and Daniel. "You arrested a federal judge without a warrant?" Randolph turned ashen. "It was a misunderstanding," he mumbled. But the captain wasn't listening. He turned to Daniel. "Judge Harris, I deeply apologize. This is unacceptable." Daniel nodded. "Yes, it is, especially when it happens to thousands of black people every single day." The captain stiffened, but he had no rebuttal. Suddenly, a roar of voices echoed from outside the room. The police station was flooded with journalists. Cameras flashed, microphones extended. The news had already hit the media. Federal judge unlawfully arrested. Racial profiling in policing. No investigation, no evidence. Is the system broken? Outside, a crowd was forming. Protesters held signs. "Justice for all. End the bias." Randolph lowered his head, realizing this was the end of his career. The captain spun toward him. "Turn in your badge and gun. You and Baker are suspended." Baker looked at Randolph in shock, but the sergeant had nothing left to say. Daniel stood up. He calmly removed his handcuffs, took his ID, and walked toward the exit. Outside, cameras were waiting. "Judge Harris, any comments?" Daniel stopped, looked directly into the camera, and said, "This isn't just about me. This is about a system that needs to change, and it will." The crowd erupted in applause, and Daniel knew this story was far from over. Part 4. The Turning Point and the Victory of Truth. The next morning, headlines exploded with the scandal. Racism in policing. The unlawful arrest of a federal judge sparks national outrage. Judge Harris exposes the system. What happens now? The arrest video went viral, racking up millions of views. People across the country were demanding justice. If this can happen to a judge, what happens to ordinary people? The system is broken. This proves it. The reckoning back at the police station. The atmosphere was suffocating. The police captain summoned Randolph and Baker. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" He slammed his fist on the desk. "It was a mistake," Baker stammered, sweating under the intense glare. "A mistake?" The captain's eyes burned with rage. "You ruined your careers, and you took the department down with you." Hours later, the official police statement was released. Officers Blake Randolph and Todd Baker have been terminated. An internal investigation into racial bias in law enforcement has been launched. Too little, too late, people raged online. But Randolph's biggest blow was still coming. That same day, the district attorney's office launched an investigation. The former sergeant now faced potential criminal charges for abuse of power. Judge Harris makes his move. A few days later, Daniel Harris walked into City Hall to meet with the mayor and the police chief. "Judge Harris, we sincerely apologize," the mayor began. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "Apologies," he said. "What about action?" The mayor hesitated, then sighed. "What do you propose? An independent commission to investigate police misconduct," Daniel stated firmly, "and mandatory bias training for all officers." The police chief reluctantly nodded. "We'll do it." Daniel said nothing, watching them as they processed the reality of irreversible change. Finale. The voice of change. A week later, a massive crowd of journalists and protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Daniel Harris stepped up to the microphone. "This case isn't just about me. It's about a system that has been operating however it pleases for far too long." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "But times are changing, and there's no turning back now." The crowd erupted in applause. "The system is starting to crack. Now we must push it to collapse." Read social media posts. And Daniel knew this was only the first victory.